Tacario Davis looked like one of the nation's best corners at Tuesday's practice.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to be talking about some practice notes, some freshman standouts that might not make an impact this year, but could make an impact down the line, 26 and beyond. We'll get into some of that. We think that this red zone defense is going to make some major improvements this season. We'll talk about that in a little while, but just a quick reminder before we get into the big topic of the day is wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you notice when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, the big story from Tuesday's practice is Tacario Davis just looked like a superstar cornerback. Obviously got named to the Bednarik Award watch list the other day, which is something we can get into a little bit, but he had 2 picks of Demond Williams on Tuesday, and I just couldn't be more impressed with where he's going.
It's exactly the Tacario that we expected was going to be at Arizona last season, and the one that we certainly expect to see this fall. And you can understand why he had that little bit of a regression last season at Arizona, but coming back with John Richardson and having the effect of Ryan Walters, and just I think the mindset that he came to Washington with which is I should be a first-round pick in 2026. I didn't. Yeah, I probably could have been a first-round pick in 2025, but no doubt about it, this is the Tacario Davis that I think Washington needed to see, and honestly, I mean the Tacario that we all would expect to see.
Yeah, so I certainly agree with you there. I will say the one thing that I've heard from a couple people in the draft world is after going back and watching his 2024 film, and it's exactly, one of the biggest reasons why he did come back, is the way that coaching staff utilized him at Arizona. Some of the different things they had him do compared to what John Richardson was having him do in 2023 are a few reasons that he wanted to come back to school and maybe, wouldn't have gone as highly as some might have expected in a draft where you had a two-way player go in the top 5, and a couple other really high-end corners go pretty early as well, like John A. Barron. Ben Morrison fell to the second round because of some hip injuries, but we don't need to get into that. Where I was watching a lot of Tacario today, obviously, and looked like some of the NFL scouts were very intrigued in what he brought to the table. The first pick was one where I think he just did a really good job showing off why he's going to be such an important part of just this Ryan Walters defense and why it can run so effectively with him on the outside, manning up against the number 1 receiver on a week in, week out basis, because he was going against Rashid Williams and he just did a really good job not letting him get a release on the line, kept his hands on him all the way downfield and just never let him get by. And Demond Williams' pass was a little bit overthrown and he took advantage of that. And that's something that, we had conversations about him earlier this fall and the spring as well. With John Richardson as well, we hear him talk about that all the time. It's turning those good plays, those PBUs, into great plays and getting those turnovers, getting those interceptions. And that's something that, again, as the season goes along, he's got 1 interception in his career. He has a major opportunity in this one-on-one coverage scheme that we're going to see so much with this press man on the outside, with so many guys crowding the line of scrimmage, that he's going to get tested. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And it's just a matter of him finding a way to take advantage of that, and he did today.
And you'd have to imagine, though, because I don't disagree that he will be targeted, much like, the Ohio State game when he's on Jeremiah Smith. Certainly Ohio State's not just going to go away from Jeremiah with or without Tacario in coverage. But I just think, at some point, there's going to be like a dam that breaks where either teams are going to go away from him after that Ohio State game or something. So he's kind of got to take advantage of those opportunities when they come, because what we saw from that scrimmage on Saturday, I don't remember Tacario being targeted that much really at all. And so when, Demond has 2 picks against him, it's, you have to be opportunistic. You have to not only, it's one thing to, like you said, make a good play, get a PBU, those types of things. But in the NFL, it's takeaways. It's, flip the script. It's actually, stop right there and then get the ball back. Not just, hey, we forced a 3 and out, but then they pinned us down deep. Those are all the little things that come into play when you talk about what's the difference between just batting a ball away and getting a pick. we're talking 30, 40 yards of field position there. So that's a significant amount of difference there. And that's one of the reasons among many that you brought Tacario in to help Ephesians Pricelock out on the other side, to just overall round out the secondary, and really to bring one of the most premium quarterbacks in the country to your program.
No, it absolutely is. And, when you talk about great plays and flipping field position, things like that, I think the second pick he had was a little bit more, just telling to that point, which is kind of why I wanted to save it and talk about each one in particular, because they really were very different situations. I had to check my notes there because the first one came in a early team period of 11 on 11s where, it wasn't like a full team drive. It's one of those ones where you're just running a whole bunch of different plays from the same spot on the field. The second one was the offense was trying to drive down towards the far end zone on the East practice field. And DeMond Williams tried to make a tight window throw to Desmond Roebuck. And Tacario did a really good job of cutting in front of it and doing one of those things that, again, it's about that career progression, and we haven't seen him do very often, is turn those good plays into great plays and finish it off for an interception. And it wasn't necessarily a perfect throw from DeMond, who didn't have his best day on the practice field on Tuesday. He was a little bit more inaccurate than we've been used to seeing from him. But that's also part of this. It's about taking advantage of that. And we've seen Tacario make some phenomenal plays in PBUs. Like I think back to a week or two ago in the end zone when he had to go full extension to bat a ball away from Rasheed Williams. But this one in that same light was finishing that play off, or that one, there was no way he was going to get both hands on it and pull it in. This one, he had an opportunity to do that, and he did it. And we have seen, points at different plays throughout fall camp where other guys haven't been able to convert on some of those plays. There were a couple today that maybe should have turned into interceptions and guys couldn't get both hands on it or just complete the process of the catch. We see it in drills all the time, right? But seeing him be able to do that twice in a live practice like that is something that I think can't go understated. And it's not just, people are going to panic and say, oh, well, DeMond was inaccurate. That's not something that's going to happen. Jedd talked about it on Saturday after the game, the scrimmage, saying that this offense has done a really good job of protecting the ball through the first couple of weeks of fall camp. And, it's something that maybe he jinxed it and swung back the other way just a little bit. But just seeing one of the players, obviously, like I said earlier, someone who is nominated for the Bednarik Award, which is the Defensive Player of the Year in college football, he absolutely has that potential because we've seen him live up to it. It's not like a projection thing, right? Where we've seen DeMond have those highs, but we haven't seen him sustained over a long period of time. When you talk about the Maxwell Award, you wrote about him not being included on the Davey O'Brien watch list. But with Tacario, we've seen him, get one away from the Pac-12 lead in pass breakups as a sophomore. Like he has that potential to be one of, if not the best cornerback in the nation. And shows why, even when you had an all Big Ten honorable mention guy in Thaddeus Dixon already on the roster, you wanted to continue to go out there and upgrade and get arguably the best corner in the nation.
No doubt about that. And as you were saying, DeMond didn't have his best day. You look at the Big Ten quarterbacks, and there's not a ton of elite talent. We both have our opinion about Drew Aller and Luke Altmaier, Julian Say, and whoever wins that Ohio State quarterback battle. All those types of things kind of factor into it, where this is a prime opportunity for Tacario to take advantage of, Nico Amaliava, a guy that was on the Davey O'Brien list that I'm thinking easily Tacario could have 2 picks against in November. And it's those types of games where you might not always have a pick in every single game or even every other game. Like you mentioned, he only has 1 pick in his career. But this is kind of the perfect opportunity for him to say, you know what, in a big-time conference, again, step up in the Big 12, but a step down in quarterback play. And that's the prime opportunity for Tacario to take advantage of that and say, you know what, if I have, what would I set the under at? 4.5 picks, I think?
I'm setting it even lower than that, to be honest with you.
And that's fair, just because again, you have part of that is I'm surprised if he's going to get targeted more and more as the season goes along, as long as he has success. But I just think there's going to be some quarterbacks that he kind of goats into some bad decisions, like he did maybe with DeMond. And I think those are the opportunities where he could absolutely take advantage of it.
No, I agree with where you're going with that, because as you were saying that, I was like, if he gets 3, I'd be more than happy with that. But it's one of those things where if he has, let's just say it is 3 picks and 10, 11, 12 pass breakups by the end of the season, you're more than happy with that, because that shows that he was able to make those great plays and take a step forward in terms of ball skills and catching it, but also getting back to where he was as a sophomore in terms of just being in the right spot at the right time and making plays in coverage. And Lars, Tacario Davis is a really important part of this defense, but it also looks like it's going to be vastly improved inside the 20. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet, which is great news for anybody out there like me. I needed some help with some budgeting, and now not only am I budgeting smarter, I'm saving more, and it's helping me reach not just my financial goals, but my personal health goals as well, because Monarch helps me afford that extra tub of protein powder. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege. Lars, we've talked a lot about the offense and what it needs to do to continue to improve inside the 20-yard line. And I don't think the defense was necessarily bad in some of these categories when you go look at them from a year ago, but I just think that it's still going to be a lot better. And I think the defensive line is a big reason for it. I was really impressed with what Xe'ree Alexander brought to the table today in an extended red zone period where the offense started at the 20-yard line. He was really, really good at setting the edge, not only just turning runners back inside into the teeth of the defense, but he also made a couple of TFLs. And I think about guys like that as just players Washington didn't have last season. And part of that was due to injuries, right? We saw Russell Davis miss the majority of the season. Isaiah Ward, Zach Durfee were kind of in and out of the lineup at different points in time, where I know Isaiah ended up playing the majority of the games, but there were a few where it seemed like, you know, you could have found a bigger role for him, but he just wasn't physically big enough to play the position just yet in a full-time capacity. But I look at the depth, especially of that unit, and I think it's going to be so much harder to not just run against this defense this year, but convert in short yardage situations.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at, Simone Peppa, Anterio, Thompson, two big guys you didn't have, Logan Sagapolu taking another step. Like, there's so many different changes that you have on this defense that, like you said, we're just flat out, the bodies weren't even there last season, let alone the specific players. And I think that's another part of the scheme where you look at the 5-down line set where you don't necessarily need a, 3 outside or 3 linebacker set. And this is also where Alex Malofin factors into this as well. Guys that are marching down from that secondary into the box. Leroy being able to, or Rashawn Clark, either one of those two guys being able to show that they could kind of come up and make those TFLs and run support and things like that on the outside. No matter who you have, once you get inside the 10, I would expect to see a different package. But even inside right at the 20 or inside from the 20 to the 10, there's so many different packages that you can go with this defense that I think they were in the 80s last season in terms of opponent red zone conversion and things like that. And so for me, if that number is down to, call it even 50, like you're not looking to, cut it in half. It's just enough to where you're taking away 1 or 2 drives, 1 or 2 scores, forcing a field goal instead of a touchdown. Those are the things we didn't see last season, and that's kind of where Washington fell apart.
You're absolutely right. So one quick note for all the everydayers out there. Rashawn Clark was not suited up at Tuesday's practice, which led to Leroy Bryant taking a whole bunch of those reps in the nickel, which we also noted that we saw on Saturday where Rashawn was out there. But it's one of those things where it's still exactly what you're talking about, right? Where after Jordan Shaw hit the transfer portal last year, it's why this coaching staff didn't necessarily panic in that department and want to go bring in another corner in that, or another nickelback, in that spot, because they felt really comfortable with what Dyson McCutcheon brings to the table, with what Leroy and what Rashawn Clark all bring to the table in that same department. And they felt that they're just going to get a little bit more as a run defender out of that spot. So it's exciting to think about. And then on top of it, it's some of these 3 safety looks as well, where McKellisteen made a nice play and had an interception today off of Kai Horton. We've seen CJ Christian and Alex McLaughlin rotate in and out that box spot as well. And Ryland Allen, Vincent Holmes has made plays too. There are so many different, exactly as you said, there are so many different looks you can throw out there at opponents. And it just feels like not only is this going to be a much better tackling unit, but it is just a much bigger, stronger, more physical defense than we saw at any point last year. And, it kind of ties into, as the everydayers know, what we were talking about last week in expecting this offense to take a step forward, especially inside the 20-yard line, especially when it comes to scoring. It's finding ways to create extra possessions and not letting these drives drag out for 11, 12, 13, 14 plays. Like I think about that Indiana game where they had what was it, 6-7 snaps inside the 10-yard line on that one possession. Like, that's something that I don't think we're going to see this year because this defense is just so much stronger in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of one where I was trying to think of a couple other games, maybe the Penn State game a little bit. Again, that's a talent mismatch on a separate equation, but just those types of games where if you want to be a top 25 program, a top 15 program, those are the games you have to not only be competitive in, but potentially win. And so when Jedd Fisch and the staff and this personnel department looked through the offseason, you could clearly see, even by the end of November, like Jedd knew what he had to address, and without question, across the board, they addressed it. And so for me, it's, I would even go as far as to say you could limit, because I think they were right around 9 or 10 in terms of opponents' scores in the red zone, not just attempts, but just kind of overall scores, right behind Oregon, I think, or right above Oregon, somewhere in that realm. But it's the difference of, are they touchdowns or field goals? Are you talking about 21 points or 9 points? That's a more than double swing there. And so for me, those are kind of the little idiosyncrasies where you're saying, if you can force, one more 3-and-out, one more extra kick, or, just kind of hold them there if a team wants to go for it on 4th down. We saw that in the scrimmage a couple of times where I think it was a 4th and short or 4th and whatever. I forgot who made the tackle for loss, but you could see it right away. I think it was inside the 15, and it's plays like that where, whether you had the players on the roster last season, I just don't think it was ever going to come to fruition for a number of different reasons. And that's why you brought in Ryan Walters as an experienced Big Ten, coach, to say, hey, you know what it takes to win defensively in the Big Ten. I know, as Jedd would say, I know on offense I can make this go from our side of the ball, but we need to have those extra possessions so DeMond can get another, 5 to 7 throws. Jonah and Adam can get another 3 to 5, 7 carries. And yeah, it might sound like small numbers, chips and potatoes, but those are the plays at the end of the day when you're talking about a 35-30, 35-32 game where, think back to the Oregon game in 23 where, Oregon tried to go for it on 4th down, you don't get it, and you strike right back. It's those flips of the field where obviously that wasn't in the red zone, but you're just talking about finding ways to stop teams and then regain the momentum on your side. You have all the bodies to do it now.
No, absolutely. And I want to throw those numbers out there. Washington was 10th in the Big Ten last year with an 82.2 percentage, just scoring percentage allowed in the red zone, with 37 scores in 45 attempts, with 29 touchdowns and 8 field goals. Oregon was 14th, as you said, with 36 scores allowed in 42 attempts, which is 85.7%. The biggest difference is they allowed 22 touchdowns and 14 field goals compared to Washington's 29 touchdowns and 8 field goals. So that's one of those things where we did see it at various points last year where the defense was strong in that regard, but it was the 3rd and shorts, the 4th and shorts, where teams could just run the ball consistently and find ways to get through. And that's the thing that you can't happen this year. And as you said, this coaching staff and this personnel department did a really good job of addressing and finding ways to fix and overcome. So I'm just so curious to see how that's going to play out this year, because it does go back to the personnel and some of the different things we've seen this coaching staff roll out there, where it's, Logan Sagapolu next to Simone Peppa, next to Deshaun Lynch, and whether it be Anterio Thompson, Taitai Uyunglele, you have just these different personnel packages of much larger defenders that you can throw out there this season and just add that extra physical boost that we haven't seen. And it is, a completely different thing when you're practicing against your own team versus playing somebody else. But as I continue to watch this, and just to tie this all back in with, with the first segment, when you have a group of guys on the outside like Ephesians Prysock and Tacario Davis, plus Rashawn Clark, Leroy Bryant, whoever's in the nickel, when you know that you can hold up in pass coverage as well, it just gives you so much more freedom. And this is where adding Ryan Walters plays such a big part in this. And it's not that Steve Belichick was not good at these things. It's just Ryan Walters is somebody who understands how to put these things together at a Big Ten level in a way that Steve just had to prepare for things a little bit differently at the NFL. It's an apples to oranges comparison. It's not the same thing in any way, shape, or form. And why, when Steve Belichick moved on, it was so easy for Jedd to just say, I know who I want, and bringing him in was just such a big win for this program. And if it all comes together this season, I feel like there's just an opportunity to take a massive step forward because, again, the talent level is so greatly improved. Like we talked about yesterday, those are things that we truly can't harp on enough because there's just such a vast difference between what last year's roster was and where you are this season. And I feel like we can talk about that enough But until we see it on August 30th against UC Davis, which is, going to be a discussion in and of itself, but until we see it in that first game, it's not necessarily going to be something that people are going to realize outside of just the Seattle area until it's done against another team. And I'm really excited for what that's going to look like. Lars, I'm really excited about what some of these freshmen are going to bring to the table too. There are so many guys to be excited about on this Washington defense. We just named a whole bunch of them. Tacario Davis, Anterio Thompson, Buda Alukta are a couple that are on the top of my list. Ryland Dillard-Allen, Alex McLaughlin. I kind of wanted to exclude Ryland from that conversation just because I want to talk about a different category of freshman, but he's just been so impressive throughout spring and fall camp. That's hard not to mention him. But one guy who I really think we need to talk about that continues to shine in some of these third and fourth team periods, who it's going to take a year or two for him to consistently work his way into the mix. But a guy who I couldn't be more excited about is Jonathan Epperson.
That's a guy where I remember watching him going through spring and fall and just thinking about the size difference that, when I remember when he committed, I was like, ooh, can he actually hold up, in that middle linebacker or even nickel spot?
Because he was listed at 180. That's right. Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know how I feel. And then we saw him out of practice and I'm like, that's Jonathan Epperson? Like that same guy was listed at 180 is that guy. Okay, now you can start to see it. And I think he's currently listed as a linebacker, right? I think officially he's that. And so I think pairing him at that position, yeah, you might not still think he has the perfect size for it, but he has the perfect instinct for it. He has, again, what we always touch on, high football IQ. One thing I was noticing during the scrimmage on Saturday was I think Jonathan was making a player, had just come off the field, and Zaydrius was working through a kind of a jab drill with him, kind of just working through some things with him and saying, hey, try and do this, where Zaydrius obviously not able to get on the field, but a guy who absolutely knows how to play the linebacker position, and a fellow in-state kid as well. Just that type of tandem where you're not expecting him, you're not going to see him this season, but a 26, a 27 down the line like you were talking about earlier, those are the guys where get him in the weight room, get that extra muscle on them. So when he's able to be a redshirt freshman next year, you can say, okay, now we can start to sprinkle you into more packages and see where you fit in, because I absolutely love him at that linebacker position.
So let's talk about this combination of him and Zaydrius, because we've seen it in this 26 recruiting class, how just it shows how high they are on those guys, because they haven't taken a true inside linebacker. And I don't think they're going to at this point in the cycle. And I feel like a lot of that is because of just how excited this personnel department and this coaching staff is about this combination of Zaydrius and Jonathan Epperson, along with Donovan Robinson. It's having all three of those guys can be a long-term solution for this position. And I just think about some of the different combinations that you can use of a guy like Zaydrius walking down into the box, because we know he can rush the passer. We know he can make some of those plays. Plus a guy like Jonathan, who's got tremendous range to the point where, as you said, it felt like he might play safety for a little while before he ended up enrolling. And just some of the different things that you can do there is really exciting to think about long-term. Obviously, we haven't seen Zaydrius Rainey-Sale going through any team periods just yet as he continues to work his way back from a torn ACL, which kind of just lends the point that, while you and I both believed that he was going to be able to play this season following the injury, it was kind of like, okay, maybe you can put that on the back burner. He can take the red shirt this season and you can figure it out. And maybe he, works his way into the rotation in 2026. But that kind of also just lends into the point of, this is why on yesterday's show, you and I spent so much time talking about the talent on this roster and why it's set up so well for the long term. Because Jacob Manu is still on the sideline going through, some of these rehab drills too after his torn ACL in October of last year at Colorado. And this roster at so many different positions, you can point to what linebacker looks like and say, oh yeah, you took a couple of really solid transfers in Buda Alukta, in Xe'ree Alexander, plus Devin Bryant continues to emerge. And then you look behind them and it's, wait, those guys are just as good. What kind of potential and, in Jacob Manu's what kind of production those guys can also bring to the table whenever they see the field. And it just gets me thinking about so many other positions on this roster. Like tight end is another one where Austin Simmons and Bear Naone are two guys who we're probably not going to see them this season. But you look at the potential that those guys have and some of the plays they make in practice on a day in, day out basis. And it's, there's a lot to like at this tight end position as well.
Yeah, Austin's a guy where, if not for him being a freshman, just the guys in front of him, Decker DeGraff, Cade Eldridge, and Quentin Moore, that's a guy to me where I would see him getting the Jacob Lane version of the offensive package, where you just bring him in on a couple of speed packages or a couple of certain things because he's so athletic. There's a number of different things. I can't wait to see what Jedd does with him. And then with Barry Naone, I'm not saying Decker to grab 2.0 because obviously there are different skill sets, but he's got the size, he's got the movability, and you just look at him, the way he goes through things, you can see 18, 24 months down the line, that could be a guy where you're saying, okay, you know what, we didn't see him really at all his first year and a half in the program, but now all of a sudden he's emerging. It's, well, yeah, because he had to sit behind an All-American and Decker to grab, and right. a good veteran blocker in his own right, and Quentin Moore, who, I'm not, shit on Quentin, it wouldn't be in the same category as Decker, but just a guy where Barron has such an ability to block that he's still got to figure out the pass catching side of it, where Austin's kind of flipped, where Austin's more of the pass catcher and needs to work on his run and blocking and things like that. It's a perfect scenario for both those guys because just like a linebacker, they don't need to see the field, but you want them to still get ingratiated into the offense, learn the playbook, get in early. And so that way, when you, obviously Austin came in before Barron, but when you finally have your turn to shine, it's no longer that massive jump that some people might think at the time.
No, absolutely. And that's one of the things that's really exciting because, we've talked about it with that position before of Jordan Paopao just knows how to develop that position so well. And it's something that you're very willing to be patient with. You're very willing to just say, okay, we know what Decker brings to the table because we saw it last season. We've seen Quentin more than earn his worth in that starting spot as a run blocker alone over the past couple of seasons. And you don't need to rush those guys where, our buddy Jake Butt said it on signing day of Barry Naone this guy reminds me a lot of myself and just how he's just the way he plays the game, how he runs routes and different things like that. But you're willing to be patient like that. Like we put the video up on our Instagram and YouTube and all forms of social media at Locked On Huskies, by the way, make sure to follow us all over there. But it's Jordan Paopao just talked about everything that Barron needs to do is up here. It's all the mental stuff in terms of learning the playbook, which are things that you don't have to rush. And if he picks those things up immediately, awesome. You're more than happy with that. And you can find a way to ingratiate him into the offense a little bit quicker, but you don't need to do that. You don't need to rush him. And just to bring it back to the recruiting trail again, that's why we saw Washington take a guy who, a lot like Austin, is probably a year or two away from being able to contribute consistently at the earliest in Sam Villadal, where it's, you like the athleticism, you like the upside that he brings to the table, but you're more than willing to be patient. And the reason I wanted to stress that is another guy who really stood out to me and has throughout fall camp, but we haven't said his name yet, is Victor Sanchez Hernandez. And this is a guy who we saw him, come in 6'5", 240, 245. He's got good size already. I think he might even be up to 250 at this point in time. I haven't checked the updated roster, just weights and heights and all that on the website. But he was playing on the interior, the defensive line today. And I was having a conversation with our buddies, Andy Yamashita, Christian Capel, and we were talking about it. And it was one of those things where we were kind of like, oh, if he plays the Taitai Uyunglele role in a couple of years, are you going to be surprised by that?
No, because as you were saying that, I think it's one thing we talked about when he committed was a guy that is the high end, the high upside is there, and you can look at his film and say, oh, really? You're going to take that guy as one? But you see the 2-3 years down the line, if he ends up, whether it's edge or inside, that's why you take him. And I think
why not both?
Exactly. And I think as we've seen with Taitai, you can do both. And I think that's exactly why you take a kid like that. And also worth noting that, the Taekwondo background, all those types of things where he's got the athleticism, he's got the talent and ability. He just needs, probably another, 18 to 24 months. And then that's when the clock really starts, because for him, defensive linemen, especially and similar to offensive linemen, you look at it and say, well, rarely do those guys start day one as freshmen. Usually you want to bulk up, get in the weight room. And if you can get up to 260, 275, that's the one that I'm going to be really because if you can get up to that weight, that's one where you truly can play inside a route, because it's going to be in certain packages, but in a 5 down front, you're not going to be that, key, 3 tech. You're going to do whatever you need to do as one of 4 prime bodies.
So here's the biggest thing for me. You mentioned it perfectly when you talk about his Taekwondo background. That's one of the things where when you read into that side of his athletic journey and how still new he is to the game of football, you understand why you want to add like a guy like this 11 times out of 10, because A, you're willing to be patient when you're that new to the game of football, but B, it's one thing where you looked at the way he uses his hands versus just somebody else in his class in Devin Hyde or in Caleb Smith. And you just see how different it is. He just understands how to place them so well. His hands just fire so quickly. And it's about learning the lower half. It's about learning just how to, use your power and your natural just size to do things a little bit differently than maybe you have previously when you're, doing Taekwondo. Again, having an Olympic level Taekwondo background is something you would never want to pass up on in the first place, but you're starting to see it translate in some of these individual drills. It hasn't come together in some of these team periods. And again, we don't expect it to just yet, but it's, as you said, you see why. And if it's 18, 24 months down the line, and all of a sudden you and I are talking about, oh, hey, Victor Sanchez Hernandez is really popping, in some of these team period drills when he's playing outside linebacker or he's moved to the 5 technique and doing things inside and just creating havoc and causing pressure. It's really exciting to think about what that can be. But again, it requires patience. And it's one of those things when, we look at people who just react to the star ranking, nothing more on the recruiting trail, and saying, why do you take a guy like this? It starts to show up during fall practice, and it's still very early and he's still a very raw prospect. But there's a lot to be excited about down the line, in my opinion.
It's why we always say, trust the evaluation, trust the process, the old cliche there. But it's true, where I don't think they've had a bad, in terms of read on a prospect or read, especially in high school, where that's kind of where they make their bread and butter. And so I think, again, especially when you add the caveat of not right away, but we want to get you in the program right away so you can start to build and progress, 6, 12, 18, you kind of stack each season as it comes. That's where it comes key, where you're not going to require him to say, hey, you know what, we're counting on you next spring or next fall. It's no, we want you to be in the mix by next fall. But if you're not breaking through, it's okay. You still got another 6 to 12 months to really break through. And at that point, then I would be surprised if he hasn't put it all together by then.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank all of you for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason, or not even the offseason. We're still in fall camp. We've got, a little over 3 weeks of the first game? Yeah, make sure you hit that subscribe button because, like I said, so much more fun stuff coming. And wherever you get your podcast, so that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell so you notice when we post a new show. And if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Make sure to click the like button. Got any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comments section. And with that being said, we'll talk to you on Thursday.